Okay, just to explain the mess, it's summer holiday time in Ireland, so that means there's bits of child all over the place, and I apologise, I should have made more of an effort to clean up, but the way middle-aged sort of saddos like us make guitar videos is we just grab all the time we can, and I thought that you wouldn't mind, so thank you for your tolerance. It's Tuesday when I'm shooting this, which means that we're kind of still in the throes of the working week, so I think it's only appropriate that we do some blues. Obviously, it would be more intense if we did it yesterday, but I didn't want to have you crying. I'm using the Edwards today. I have a video about this particular guitar, but just to remind people or to introduce people to it, this is a 3-pickup Les Paul copy, except it has a 6-way switch and push-pull pots here. And what that means is that I can coil tap each of these, but also I can send the middle one out of phase. So there's a lot of stuff that can happen. So I'll play some blues. I'm going to talk about my approach to how I improvise over this. This is live and dangerous, so to speak. And I'm going to start with this. And you can already hear it kind of humming, maybe. This as a single coil. It's not booking hum anymore and is quite noisy. But look, let's see what happens. Okay, that's a bit chaotic, but it gives me a sort of a place to start with what I really want to talk about, which is how I try and improvise. Because when I say try, I'm not a great improviser. I'm not where I used to be about 15 years ago when I played a lot more blues, but I'm on a bit of a journey on trying to improve, and I just want to share some of the things I've picked up along the way, really. The reason my improvisation has suffered is because I play in a tribute band and I kind of stuck to the material that I'm playing with. So it's more about recreation rather than improvisation. But there's certain rules that are obviously quite different when it comes to blues. And I was lucky enough to have some great teachers when I was starting out. And one of the rules that stuck the most with me is probably don't listen to guitar players playing the blues. Learn solo from a saxophone or learn the vocal line. In fact, there's certain people that believe you shouldn't play solo on anything unless you can play the vocal line. So the first thing I'll say is if you can try and think like a singer or a brass player, it immediately kind of liberates you, because you kind of fall into sort of you know, guitaristic traps that we all do. I mean, like I did something like this, I'm sure, about 1,000,000 times, where I would start going up and down the scale, but not really what a singer or a brass player would do. What they'd be more inclined to do is try and find the notes that sort of take them from one place to another, and then look at rhythms and excite out of those. So when people learn blues, they learn it in such a way as that they learn those shapes and they kind of feel comfortable and they just kind of fire them out, and it gets really boring as a result. And what I would suggest is, if you really want to set yourself free, other than just, as the aforementioned advice goes, learning the parts of another instrument, try and not think of the neck as sort of isolated chunks, and try and see if there's a scale to be played across a single string. I'll give you an example of that. Now, this is a minor key blues, so just to explain that, we have an E minor, an A minor, and when it goes around to the tail, it goes to B7, and the turnaround ends on a B7. So this is actually kind of an unusual chord progression for the blues, and it's kind of a New Orleans style vibe that I picked up along the way. So it's definitely minor key. So if we are talking about scales, the scales we're talking about are E blues. And most of you are probably familiar with different places to play that on the neck. When the A minor comes along, you can think of A minor pentatonic, because that'll fit. And then when it goes back to E, E minor again. But the B7 is kind of one that'll throw you out, because it's not really something that you should look at the B minor pentatonic to play over, because the B minor pentatonic is minor because it has this note, the D, and a D over a B chord is what makes it a minor chord, it's the minor third. But B7 is a major chord, so it's got a major third. So this is the spice that we're adding to this, which is, instead of looking at this from a sort of a pentatonic and blues scale kind of approach, why not have a look at it from a harmonic minor kind of approach? Oh Jesus, what's he on about now? Okay, let me explain a harmonic minor. This is G major. And what your minor scale actually is a mode of G major. So the minor scale that you would have learned when you're playing Nothing Else Matters or any of that type of stuff is basically, in this case, G major starting on its sixth note, which is E. So if I play those same notes, but I'm going to start on E this time, I'll just do it in a different octave. And end it on E, you can hear that it has that minor flavour. Now, the problem with a minor scale is, from a harmony point of view, when you bring out all the chords that are contained within it, the fifth chord you get is B minor. And if I play B minor going back to an E, it doesn't resolve. And what that means is it doesn't feel like it has concluded. So let's play a chord progression. So here's the E minor, A minor, and then B minor, and then back to E minor. It's not a really nice resolution. So what our ear really wants to hear is that fifth chord before the first chord being major. And the last chord can be minor, but like if we listen again, I'm going to make the B a major chord. And it has that kind of sort of nice, perfect roundness to it. And that's called the perfect cadence in music. And it's sort of the natural way to resolve a sort of a phrase or measure, to bring it back to the tonic chord, back to the E minor. So what's a harmonic minor scale? Well, if we go back to our E minor scale, this is the note that makes the fifth chord minor. So if we just simply sharpen it, we get that. Okay, so this is a very interesting note, because if we're playing blues, if we play this scale over blues, it doesn't really sound like blues anymore. It sounds a little bit too exotic. So the trick is, when you want to bring some sort of exoticism, another note into a blues scale, is to play your normal blues scale, but to try and just introduce it at the right time for the chord that it's on. So in other words, when this 12 bar comes to the B7, introduce that note there now, and you can see here that it fits wonderfully over it. And then it'll bring back to the E really nicely. So introducing those notes into the phrasing is quite nice. Now, I did another one as well. If you're playing your first E blues sort of chord progression, you probably learned that boogie with the... So in the key of E, that extra note that we added to the chord to make it a 6 is an F sharp, which is not in the blues scale. But we can introduce it. So when the A minor is on, I'll just play an A note and pedal off it. It doesn't sound so alien in blues. And you can get a nice lick from going from the A minor back to the E minor by, and just to show you where I'm working from, I am kind of thinking a bit like the A pentatonic. But if I grab that F sharp, and if I bend it to a G, and bring it back to the E, it does have a bluesy vibe to it. So in other words, if we do... It's a nice way of getting the minor scale in there without losing the blues feel. So there's a few other ways of doing that as well, which is to think chordally. And this is another way of setting yourself free. And when the B7 comes up on the chord progression, if we can see where the notes of that scale are, we can try and accentuate them with our licks. So the notes of that chord, it's a B7, so they're B, D sharp, F sharp, and A. And B again. So it's nearly a sort of a pentatonic scale in itself. But we can use those to formulate our licks. So here's our E blues scale. And you see what I've done there is I've just used the chord tones to construct a lick. Still bluesy, but still nicely spicy to fit over it. And that works for all of the chords. But wait, there's more. The tonality of the E minor blues, the chord that you're hearing over the E, it's not really an E minor, it's an E minor 7th. And when you extend chords, you're extending them with every other note. So E minor is E, G, and B. E minor 7 is E, G, B, and skipping a note to D. And if you wanted to extend it further, you'd add a 9, which is F sharp in this case. So we have E, G, B, D, F sharp. And didn't we just use F sharp a minute ago to work over the B7 chord? So if we introduce this note into our blues scale, it makes things sadder and more, dare I say, European in terms of the melody, but it also works nicely over the chord. And this is a trick that you hear in Gary Moore's solo over Still in Love With You. Actually, he does it an awful lot. Anytime you hear Gary Moore play a minor blues, he creates tension over the tonic chord by playing that 9 over it. So over the A, for example, the 9 is B. There it is. So it's a nice way of just, again, causing a tension to happen in a way that's not typical in blues and really works in a, sort of just, giving it a bit more of a vocal flow. Blues singers very rarely just sing through a blues scale. It's kind of a funny thing that guitarists do because they'll always scoop in behind the note. And if you follow Chris Buck, if you don't follow Chris Buck, try and find Chris Buck on social media and follow him because he plays guitar like a singer. He uses lots of big wide bends and things like that, but he'll also use those notes that aren't in the blues scale because that's what a singer would do. Now, they mightn't dwell on them all the time, but they do actually sort of bring out a flavour. So I'm going to try improvise again, and I'm going to talk over it this time so you can actually hear it. So let's run that 12 bar from the top. So here's E minor, and I'm going to try play the 9 over it. And the 9 in this case is F sharp. There's a 7. And there's A minor. We'll do the 6, there's a 6. And back to E minor, back to the E. And here's the B7, we're going to use the chord. A minor. Now, I'm going to do some call and response. Here's a lick, and I'll do it an octave higher. And this is kind of an important enough trick, actually, because I hear Rory Gallagher do this one a lot. And I like to deploy it as well. So it's kind of what a singer might do. They might sing something low here. So I'll just show you what I'm working on here. So we're on E minor. I'm going to use the blues scale. So it's kind of... Oh, excuse me. It's those notes around there. If you have one of those scale apps, you can pick it out. But if you can come up with a phrase there and then transpose it an octave higher instantly, that's that call and response thing. So we could start low. I'll do something just hackneyed and cliched like this. And up high. And maybe end it on a different note. And that's a great way of actually just building up a lick by just trying to mimic the two of those. Now, this is not something that's easily done. So the way to do it is to practice it. And the way I practice it is come up with a simple lick here and then, excuse me, try and recreate it in another octave. But the effect is really nice because you can hop back and forth. So talking about Chris Buck bends, I'm going to dangerously expose myself here. I'm going to try some wide bends here. Now, when we're playing E blues, we'll go to our friendly part of the neck. One of our preferred bends as guitarists is bending this D up into an E because it resolves against the tonic chord. It is the tonic chord, it is E. But if you're brave, you could bend it up higher again to the next note in the scale. And this is what I'm talking about, the way a singer would do, because that's what a singer would do. So without bends, that would be like a tone and a half. And what Chris Buck might do would be, it's just try and force it out of the one bend, and that way you can get, you know, really expressive licks. And it's very dangerous because it's very hard to pitch them, but that's what singers do. They take those kind of risks, and that's what makes their singing charismatic. So that's another trick to add to the bag. Now, going back to what I actually started talking about, which is looking at the single string. Now, why would I want to do that? It's purely because it forces your phrasing to be more vocal. So things like slides and grace notes and bends seem to happen more naturally when you think about the length of the neck as opposed to the cut of the neck vertically. So I'm going to show you just the blues scale on the B string. So this is E blues, just to look at the notes. I'll let you work that out, but there's the tonic there and the tonic there, the E. If you try and make licks across a single string, you can hear that they sing a little bit more. They still sound a little bit more vocal because you're not thinking about, you know, trying to bring it back down to a friendly place on those strings. You're constantly moving to find your friendly note with your ear. So I'm going to just run the track again. We'll just do some single string licks. And what I'm going to focus on is the G string and the B string in this case. And again, just to show you what the scale looks like. So on the G string, on the B string again, it's B, D, 0, 3, 5 for the E, 8, and then 10, 11, 12, and then 15, and then 17 is the octave. So I'm going to use those two strings. And what I might do as well, actually, sorry to complicate this, is I might tap a little note here and there just to see if we can bring some fun out of that. So let's run the track again. So again, a nice approach. Now, it's kind of hard to think about all these things all at once, and that's kind of the skill of improvising, is you kind of just keep doing it over and over, and these things become things that you don't think about then. So I haven't figured out a way to share that track, but if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, here's a trick for you. If you actually look up guitar blues backing tracks, you find a lot of people have created backing tracks to jam over. I made that one myself in Logic Pro, which might be a video we might look at again, but if you don't have a backing track, run up your streaming service and you'll probably find that one there that'll work. I'll try and figure out a way to share the ones that I make, and I'll come back to you all when I actually solve that particular conundrum. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed that rant about the blues. I'll probably have more when I do more practicing, and I'll uncover more tricks that I want to share. I have a few other ideas for videos as well, but if there's anything you ever want me to cover, please let me know. And as always, subscribe, because this whole channel is about dealing with a midlife crisis, and metrics are very important when you're suffering middle age because they validate you as a person. So subscriptions are very much welcome. I'm going to play through this again because I have still some time to play some guitar, and thanks for watching.